Hi, tribe. It feels so good to be talking to you again. I know it's been a while, but now that Anne is gone, everything is a little more complicated. I recorded this a month ago, and I'm so glad I can finally share it with you. I've also been working to get the book that she had almost completed over the finish line with the publisher. It's ready for pre-order on Amazon, so I hope you all get your copy of Call Me Anne, because it really was written in large part for this tribe. It's about getting over abuse and other struggles with her personal stories intertwined. The episode you're about to hear is me trying to put into perspective what Anne stood for, what she meant to me, and what you all meant to her. Please go easy on me. This was a tough one. Love you all.
Okay, we are rolling.
I just don't know how to start this.
I think that's the perfect way to start it.
This has been incredibly difficult. But the one thing in all of this that has been clear to me after all the emails and text messages and Instagram messages from all of our listeners, from everybody in our tribe that has been with us from the very beginning, and they all were saying something so similar. I'm nobody. I'm just a mom in Iowa. I'm nobody famous. I'm nobody important. But here's what Anne meant to me. And I just want to be able to tell you all from Anne that you guys were everything to her. And that's why I'm not talking to any of the media. I'm not talking to anybody publicly except for you guys, because you guys are the ones that matter to her. And you're the ones that matter to me. This podcast has been so much fun for me and Anne. It's meant so much more to us than you will ever know. And one of the things that I found so remarkable during this past month or so is that our own podcast has actually helped me get through this horrible time. The things that we've all learned together on the podcast, the whole concept of the podcast was better together. That we can learn more from each other if we're honest, if we're kind. All of those lessons that we've all learned together on all of our shows has been really what has helped me get through this. And so I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank you for Anne, for your support and your love and your kindness and your honesty through this time.
Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't be reaching out and emailing or texting you if it wasn't for the podcast.
So many people found out how to find me through the podcast. So I've connected with people that Anne did the soap opera with, and old friends, and even the family that took her in.
Mm.
It has been, the gateway to a community that was so important for us to create. And it's a shitty way to find out that we created it.
Yeah.
But it's so appreciated. And Anne would be so tickled over it. It was, of all of the projects that Anne did, the podcast, you guys were the ones that mattered to her the most. And I genuinely genuinely say that. She loved it. Anne was somebody who would go into a restaurant for dinner with the most famous person in the world and come out knowing more about the person who served them dinner than she probably did the famous person she was at dinner with. Anne cared about, when we were, almost a year ago, we were in New York Fashion Week, which, we took you all along for that trip. And one of the things that Anne wanted to do the most when we got there was to go see her doorman from the Ritz-Carlton when she was staying there doing a play. She had a beeline for that. Anne was somebody who, despite all of the hardships that she had in life, and she had them, she still woke up every day seeking joy and happiness. She was not a negative person, and she easily could have been. And I think that there's a lot of lessons for us all to learn from Anne and to take with us. And one of them is her optimism, her sheer joy and optimism.
Yeah. She it's funny that the podcast was something she was just it I don't know if we want to cut this out, but the podcast didn't make us any money. We weren't making money off of it. It was literally it was a passion project, yeah.
Yes, it's true. We did this podcast as an outlet for her, for us, for you, because she enjoyed it so much, and spreading that message. I think I should back up a little bit, because some of you might not know how Anne and I met. And it was somewhere around 13 years ago. We met where we play tennis at our tennis club, which sounds fancy. And back then it wasn't as fancy as it ultimately became. But it was still intimidating. And women's tennis can be an intimidating thing. And I recognized in Anne immediately, as she was walking up to play with us, sort of that look of intimidation, which for Anne is a weird look to have, because she doesn't have that look very often, especially now that I know her. But I'm telling you, there's nothing like women's tennis to scare the shit out of you. And so I, kind of walked up to her and kind of took her under my wing and tried to diffuse the false heightenedness of the importance of the situation. And we became friends ever since. And then I started working with her. I did her public relations for a product that they had, so that's how I got to know Anne, was initially through work. And I continued to work with her for 13 years. And in that time, we became the best of friends, and became better together. And she became an extension of me, and I became an extension of her. And I'm at a loss, to be honest, now, without her here. And that's something that I'm still wrapping my head around, what this world looks like without her in it. But I can say one thing. While she was here, she made the most of it. And that's the lesson that I'm going to take from her. She put her mark on this world in such a way, through the stand that she took back in the 90s when nobody else had the balls to do it. All the emails that I've gotten from people who have said how that moment impacted them, how Anne coming out in the way that she did gave people the courage to do it because they could say to their parents, look, this famous actress is also gay. Which was a whole other thing because Anne stood for gender-free love, something that we know a lot about now, but we didn't then. And Anne was always somebody who was so ahead of her time.
Mm-hmm.
So ahead of her time. When she and Ellen broke up and she married a man, people called her a false lesbian. And she doesn't even, she stood for gender-free love and nobody knew what that meant at the time. She loved the person's soul. And that's something that I don't think anybody had done up until her. I don't think anybody had stood up for that up until her. And we're just now all catching up to that idea. And I think that if she hadn't taken that stand, and she paid the price for it, as we all know, and we've talked about on the podcast a lot, she paid the price for that, but she doesn't regret it.
Yeah.
She made an impacting change in this world. And I know, because I'm getting chills right now, and that's how I feel her. And it's been a bizarre thing because you guys don't know, but she knows that I wasn't the woo-woo type. She was the one that would talk about other dimensions and whatnot. And I would be like, yeah, whatever, girl. But she's laughing now. She's laughing now because I feel her completely. And whenever I say something that she agrees with, I get chills. So especially now that she's not with us, the impact that she made on this world, it matters. And I think that's something for us all to remember. Someday we're not going to be here. So the choices we make that may seem big or small, the choices that we make that make the world better, those are the choices that matter. And those are the choices that we should pay attention to. And that is what Anne stood for her entire life. I also wanted to take a minute to thank everybody so much that has been so incredibly supportive through this time. There were angels all along the way that I hope to talk about at some point. Her family, her friends that I got to know that I didn't know before. Our podcast production company, Straw Hut and Ryan. Anne's manager at Zero Gravity, Michael McConnell, was so there when we needed him and handled things in a way that I know Anne would be so grateful for. My own personal friends. My friends from grade school came out of the woodwork and sent me flowers and sent me food. Peter Pizzoli didn't send me anything. That's an inside joke just thrown out there for our longtime listeners. But in times like this, and it's probably a cliche, but it's so true, that it shows you who your friends are, and it shows you how lucky you are to have people in your life. And it also shows you how important kindness is, because if you don't give it to people, you're not going to get it back when you need it. And I keep going back to the things that Anne stood for. And that, as you all know, kindness was everything to her. Well, this is a story.
What is those rocks?
Yeah.
What are they?
I'll tell you.
Okay.
So, as I said, all along the way, Anne has been sending me messages. And anybody who really knows her, and you know her, all of you from listening to the podcast, she was incredibly intuitive. And I even made the joke to her once. If you died, you would haunt the shit out of me, wouldn't you?
You did.
And did I say that on the podcast?
I don't know, but I've heard it. I heard it.
And she said to me, I think she like slyly smiled and said, "You definitely feel me." And I feel her so much, but she's also working her magic, almost like she's like a conductor up there. I'll give you an example. In the midst of everything, it was shortly after Anne passed. You still have to, I'm still a mom. I still got to pay my bills, right? Still got to figure out life. And my son needed a haircut. So he was starting school, and they get in trouble if their hair isn't cut. And it was going to be the picture day, and they get in trouble. They call it something called jug, which in Catholic school means justice under God. You literally,
Jeez.
Anne would get a laugh out of that, actually. She did, actually. She knew what jug was. I told her. So Henry needed his haircut. So I called the person who cut his hair. I still can't remember her name, but she's cut his hair all through COVID. It's spelled differently than her name should normally be spelled. So I text her to come and say, Henry needs a haircut. And she shows up. And Henry and I both look at each other because we're still doing COVID haircuts like in the driveway, mostly because my dog is a little vicious. And so Henry and I both look at each other and say, she looks different. I'm like, I know she looks different. And I said, Henry, but she looks familiar to me. So she comes in and I hug her and she says, I'm so sorry about Anne. And she had said that in the text, which I thought was weird because I thought, how does this person cutting Henry's hair connect me? Well, from what I understand, there was some news coverage on it, but so Henry's looking at me because Henry is somebody who really cares about his haircuts. And he rarely wants to cut it. So I set her up. I realize she's a little too fancy for the driveway. I'm getting that vibe. So I no offense against the woman who usually cuts her hair up with more COVID. Look at me. I'm always afraid of hurting people's feelings. Kindness. So I bring her back into Beanie, my daughter's, in the guest house. And guest house sounds fancier than it is, folks. It's a studio. So I bring her back there and get her all set up. And Henry's sitting in the chair looking at me like kind of big eyes, like, what the fuck is happening, Mom? And so I walk away and I check my text exchange with this person cutting his hair. And I realize that this person, her name is Tiffany, spelled T-I-P-H, Tiffany was the person who did Anne's hair on Dancing with the Stars. Tiffany is the person that Anne loved on Dancing with the Stars. Tiffany would come each week with a mood board for the week. And Anne loved the time that she put into it and the thought that she put into it. And I couldn't believe it. So I go back in and I say to Henry, to ease his fears. Now, Tiffany did Anne's hair on Dancing with the Stars, and Anne loved Tiffany, you know? And also at this point, I'm thinking, oh my God, how awkward that I texted her. Like, what a weirdo must she think I am that I'm like, hey, Tiffany, can you come cut my son's hair at my house? But she didn't miss a beat. She did. And she gave him the best haircut he's ever had. But more importantly, she said, well, it's a good thing you got me today. I was about to start this project tomorrow. And without getting into details on the project, it was a project that Anne was going to do that she didn't get. And it was going to be a great role for her. But after she finished cutting Henry's hair, she was so kind and said, I've been thinking so much about you, and I wanted to give you this. And she gave me, I don't know if you can see, these 3 stones that I've been clutching ever since, and a necklace. All my necklaces actually are from all my friends that have supported me. I have a story about each one of them. One of them is from Anne. And it was during that time that I felt that I was supposed to write an Instagram post, but I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't do it. I couldn't write it. I was going to put something up that said, I don't have words. And that was literally all I was going to write. And when I took these stones and held them in my hand, I was able to find the words. And I just thought, like, wow, Anne, what an incredible. And knowing Anne, not only did she give me something, but I bet you that Tiffany, for whatever reason in her life, appreciated being needed in the way that she was, because I was so grateful. And that's what I mean when I feel like she's up there as an orchestrator of all of us and having a blast. Having a blast.
Do you know, like, why those stones? Like, do you know, did she...
Yeah, it was serenity, clarity, prosperity. I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because I'm not that deep.
I do know what you mean.
It
she had a reason when she gave them to you.
And I have to tell you, I've clutched them. And before we started the podcast, I said I have to go get something. And
that's what you got.
And that's what I got. And I actually wasn't even sure if I was going to tell that story. But there's so many more examples of that. Everywhere I go, I see this cup. It's like, I see nothing but this was, in a store right in front of me as I was checking out. And I still feel her. I don't want to talk much about the accident because I don't know much about the accident other than what we all know. I just don't know. I'm as confused as everybody else, to be honest. What I do know is that when it was reported that we had recorded the podcast in the same day, which A, is ludicrous because Anne would never record a podcast before noon. It was actually a very rare thing that we even recorded the podcast in that same week. Yeah. But we recorded the podcast much earlier in the week. I actually wasn't even able to talk to her on the day of the accident. But I had my first experience with horrible, mean, unkind, untrue, everything the opposite of what Anne stood for. Everything the opposite of what Anne stood for. The flip side, as she would always say, of everything that she stood for, which is hate. She stands for love, and the flip side of love is hate. Was overwhelming. Receiving text messages, phone calls, Instagram messages, emails, hundreds of them. Blaming me for her accident.
Yeah.
Look, I was Anne's protector. I did look out for her. She was my friend. I shielded her. I protected her. It was also my job as her PR person. But whatever happened that day, I don't know what happened that day. But the one thing that I do know is that there is no way that Anne would ever intentionally put somebody in danger. Ever. And if anybody who has listened to a minute of our podcast would know that that's true. And I would never do anything to put Anne in danger. Ever. Because I love her. And I love her family. And I love her kids. I just don't know what happened. And I don't know that we ever will.
Yeah. I keep seeing like on all these comments and stuff about, people thinking that, I don't know, you're hiding it or, or we're hiding it. This, some kind of
podcast promotes drinking. We didn't promote drinking. Look, girl, we loved having a glass of wine from time to time, but it was rare that we did actually. And if we did, it was a toast. It was it's part of our culture. It's part of our fun. It's part of our joy. We record the podcast on Fridays at 4 quite often.
Yeah. I mean, you look at any other podcast, usually drinks are built into the name of the show. It's.
And she didn't have any alcohol in her system, by the way.
Right.
So that wasn't even a part of the story. And another thing that I would like to say is that people go back and look at the podcast and say, "Oh my gosh, she was so inebriated."
Right.
Anne was. That's the way she spoke. That's the way she was. She was so creative, and her brain thought ahead of her mouth.
So fast. You could see her trying to because her brain was going so fast, trying to
catch up with
herself all the time.
Yeah, when I would see all these comments of people saying that, she wasn't drinking. She's just Anne.
Yeah.
Leave her alone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like, so what do we do now?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question.
Anne, what do we do now?
We talked about
I'm telling you, I'm going to be Frank Paris by the end of this.
I believe it.
Frank Paris, for all you who don't know, is somebody we had on our show who is an intuitive, and
he's good,
and he'll be back for sure.
I
guess I just said he'll be back, so
that's what we're talking.
That just came out of my mouth, so maybe that's Anne speaking through me. So we're trying to decide what to do, and we have a lot more to say. We had guests lined up. we have guests that have been on the show that want to come back and talk about what Anne meant to them. We'd love to hear from you about what Anne meant to you. I've already heard from so many of you, and I can't tell you how much it's meant to me and how much it would mean to Anne. Like, she would have, I can't tell you how much she would have loved that shit.
Yeah.
I would read her all the emails that people would always send, and she would be delighted. And I know that she's feeling it. I know she's feeling the love. So the question is, can we continue our tribe of learning and growing together and keeping Anne's mission alive, which is truth, love, and kindness? When Anne and I talked about starting this podcast, one of the things that motivated us was the bullshit of Instagram and how everybody was just so full of shit. And nobody was willing to talk about the difficult things in life.
Anything real.
Anything real. And we were.
And people are seeing that now, listening back to the podcast, or people that have just discovered the podcast, they are seeing how honest and truthful Anne has been this entire time. Anyway.
She made me more truthful. I was somebody who grew up completely opposite of Anne. This is actually the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life by a mile. I think I was on this podcast that said that the worst thing that ever happened to me was that my parents got divorced when I was 30. I mean, Jesus. But she helped me be more honest about my life, because like hers, it appears to be easy and great. And while I live in total joy, it's not easy. I'm going through a divorce. I've got an ex-husband, almost ex. My dining room that we're in right now is beautiful, but the rug smells like cat pee. I'm just telling you, honesty. Got very little money left in my bank account. Spent all my retirement. It's not pretty, but it's real. And I'm committed to that truth, just like Anne was on this podcast. And I want this to be a place that we can all feel safe to be who we are. And that was why we started it. Like I said, going back to the whole bullshit of Instagram, is that nobody is honest like that. Nobody is telling you the way it really is. And when you tell it the way that it is, it makes you feel less alone. It makes you feel like you've got somebody by your side in your problems.
Yes.
We got to all stop being full of shit. We got to all stop being full of shit. And that's what I want this podcast to be. That's what Anne wanted this podcast to be. That's what Ryan, I know, wants this podcast to be. And if you guys are interested, you'll let us know when we put out these next several episodes. And if you're not interested, then, we're good. But if you are, we're here for it. I guess. Right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I mean,
that sounds right.
I don't know what else to do, but try to keep her legacy alive. And her legacy was about truth, kindness, and joy.
Amen.
And frankly, I'm going to go back to season 1. We used to close the podcast. And you know why we don't? We used to close the podcast, and Anne would say, "Until next time, live in loving kindness." And I would say, "Just don't be a dick." But we stopped saying that because, and here I go, Ryan's looking at me like, and then she says too much.
Well, I just liked that ending.
But we stopped saying that because there were certain people on the podcast, and because I'm still working on getting to my truth, I felt embarrassed saying the word dick in front of certain people. So like we'd have somebody super civilized on the podcast, and then I'd look across and be like, just don't be a dick. And I felt like a dick by saying the word dick in front of somebody.
Now here you are saying dick so many times.
Anyway, I didn't know what I was going to say on this podcast, if I'm totally honest. I knew I wanted to thank you all. I knew I wanted to get across what this podcast meant to Anne and what you all meant to Anne and what you all continue to mean to Anne. Because like I said, she's here. She's here. She's sitting right next to me. And I think she'll continue to sit right next to me, if I'm totally honest. And I think she'll continue to sit right next to you all. So if any of you are feeling chills right now, no, that's Anne. And she loves you all and cares about you all. And I don't know what else to say. Don't be a dick. I love you, man. Always and forever.